Blog Talk Radio.
Are you ready to take a bite out of the competition? Are you looking for ideas to make your business better? Welcome to the Core Business Show with Tim Jacquet, sponsored by Apple Capital Group. At the core of every successful business, you'll find people making a difference. And with each episode of the Core Business Show, we talk with those people, examine those ideas, and explore the strategies that make them special. Now, the host of the Core Business Show, Tim Jacquet.
Good morning and welcome to another episode of the Core Business Show. I'm Tim Jacquet, your host. Today I have the pleasure of having Steve Elloitt Wolfe. He is an author, and his title of his book is called Young Entrepreneur's Guide to Life. If you have any questions, we invite you to go ahead and pose your question in the chat room or email me at info@Apple Capital Group, and we'll read your information on the air. Steve, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Tim. Appreciate it.
Great. I guess to begin with, I was telling you just before we went on the air, a lot of our people like to hear personal views on that, about your own person. So if you don't mind, take the opportunity and tell us about yourself.
Well, yeah, it's a loaded question. I wish I could get that question answered in like a minute or less, but that would be extremely hard to do. I mean, I'm 28 years old. I've been in business for myself since I was 18 years old. That all started when I read a little book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. You and your listeners probably know that book pretty well. And I wanted more out of life. And when I read that book, the mystery was uncovered. I began to tap into an understanding of the mythology, or more or less the methodology of how wealthy people were able to gain wealth and continue to build it and not have to work a regular standard job for the next 40 years. And I got on that train a little over 10 years ago. And it seems like finally this day and age, my generation and the market itself, and correcting that, what I've come to understand and the concepts that I began to follow so long ago are coming true so much now more for the general public and people attempting business. I think, and you probably agree with this, whether or not you're a corporate person or you work some kind of a day job looking for extra ways to make an income, or go into business for yourself, whether that be for tax strategies, tax shelters, or just because you simply want to make more money. And, one job is just not enough, and the competition out there is so incredibly fierce. I think that those ideas are very well portrayed in the book that I put out. And a lot of it was written more or less towards a younger generation that was just coming into understanding it. But for the more advanced type listeners, a lot of the skill sets and everything in there, they probably heard them before, maybe with a new innovative twist on them. But I mean, that's really what drives me is an insatiable desire to understand how to gain, generate, and sustain, wealth through entrepreneurship at whatever level that is. And so I've been in it, a couple different careers, stemming from my first company was a clothing company in Los Angeles that I started when I was 18. I was fairly successful with that. I got out of that industry when I was 20 years old to get into the financial services industry, more or less on the real estate side, but a little bit in venture capital, as well as SBA loans, rehab loans, out of the box type deals, anything in financial services. And then ultimately, when that all went down in September 2008, I found myself in multi-level marketing or network marketing, which was really the last place that I thought I would ever end up. And I've come to find that is the industry that this guy is best suited for, because I get to make my own hours. I get to build a residual income over time, and I work from home, or I work where I want to work with whomever I want to work with, when I want to do it, making my own hours. So, 28, just turned 28 about 2 weeks ago. The Young Entrepreneur's Guide to Life is the second book that thank you. And that's the second book that I've published. My first one's called The Rich Kid Syndrome, and that's more or less has nothing to do with business and more or less about the backstory of my life growing up, the trials and tribulations. I had a pretty crazy childhood before I came into that enlightenment. So that's the 10,000 foot view of Steve Wolfe's life.
Well, let's back up for a second. Let's talk about that first book, and that's going to segue back into this particular book. Tell us about that first book that you wrote. I don't have it offhand. It's about you said Bill the Rich Kid or something?
It's called The Rich Kid Syndrome. And really,
The Rich Kid Syndrome.
That book embodies my life from about, 12, 13 years old to about 18 years old. And I grew up, I definitely didn't have a traditional childhood. I had a traditional family, but my childhood was crazy. A lot of it involves music and partying and doing a lot of things that you shouldn't be doing at that age and driving your parents crazy. And if you have some older listeners who have a teenage son or daughter that are, turning 13, 14, and they're starting to get a little bit crazy, that would be an incredible book for you to read. It really has nothing to do with business, but it's about my life. I got into the punk rock scene when I was 13 years old, and I played music, and I did it professionally all the way up until about 16 and a half, where my life came to a crashing halt, and I ended up relocating back up in Los Angeles, and I completely started my life over again at 16 and a half. So it's a story, completely all within itself, and more or less, I guess the best way to describe it is if I could hand my parents a piece of literature that would help them understand what I was going through those years so that they could better help me deal with some of the struggles and the trials and tribulations of life, the rich kid syndrome would be what it is. And it really more or less deals with, parents that have kids, growing up in more of a middle or upper class area or middle to upper class lifestyle that the kids are just out of control, or narcissistic entitlement issues, drugs and alcoholism. It's a crazy story. And, but it is the foundation to, how I got involved in business, and more or less what's coming into that book. So if you really want to know more about me and you were a parent and you have a teenager, that would be an incredible story for you to read. And it would definitely give you a very straightforward look, holding no punches, of where I come from.
Well, taking it back to that particular first book, and you write on your life in that particular book, how did that prepare you for this particular book?
My first book, The Young Entrepreneur's Guide to Life.
Your first book. How did that prepare you for the second book?
It was actually very interesting. I think I'm a big believer that if you want to do something, that you attempt it, that you go for it and you try it. And no matter how bad it comes out or whether you completely fail at it, the only way that you're ever going to get good at doing anything is by attempting. I think it's been said a lot. One of my favorite quotes is that the most successful people fail the most, and the most successful people that I know have failed the most too. It just means that they fail. I mean, you look at even, take a baseball player. A great batting average is 300 or better, which means that 7 out of 10 times they're striking out at bat. And so that's the way to look at it. Basically, the person who gets to get a chance to be at bat more and be in the game hitting balls is going to have a better batting average over time. So when I wrote that first book, I self-published it. My second book, it has a pretty traditional publisher, and it was hard. I mean, I started writing that book when I was 18 and a half years old, and I think I finished it at 21, 22. I had no idea what I was doing. I asked anybody that I could get my hands on who had ever written a book before to give me tips, strategies, ideas on not only self-publishing or traditional publishing, but, finding an editor, doing all the things that you need to do to struggle through writing a book. But I completed that, and I've sold thousands of copies of the book over, the last 6, 7, 8 years, and you can always go back and revise it. That's the cool thing with how technology is now and how easy books get sold, especially through ebooks or audiobooks. And all my books can be found. There's definitely a hard copy, a paperback and a hard copy, but you can get an audiobook or an ebook too. I think there's something really cool about having a real book, but it's an incredible process. And I think that writing a book these days, especially if you have some expertise in some kind of a field and you have something that you feel should be shared and should be talked about, I always motivate people to go write their story. And almost, I think, in writing a book, it gives you a chance to solidify a lot of the wisdom and the things that you've learned, and also involve a lot of other people that you get a chance to work with. So I didn't think I was the best writer when it came out, and I struggled through writing it. I didn't use any kind of a ghostwriter or anything like that. I'd say that a good editor is very important along the writing process, but I struggled through it. When it came out okay, my second book, I think, came out better. My third book is probably going to be better than that.
When you actually went through your process to write your book, did you use an editor to fine-tune some things or structure it, or you just wrote it and it's in its raw form pretty much?
Yeah, well, I mean, even with the editor, and here's the interesting thing about an editor, the advice that I'll give the young writer if writing a book is something that you're attempting to do is no one cares more about your work than you do. And so even if you get to an editor, you're gonna pay a lot of really good hard-earned money to use that editor. What I would say is that attempt to edit it yourself, and then once that's been done, you think you've done the best job that you can do in editing it yourself, then it would be time to hire on an editor so that you can get a very finely tuned finished product before it goes to print. I think that's absolutely important, but you're going to save yourself a lot of money by reading through the book. That was the most tedious part of it. Writing it was actually easy, Tim. I like writing. I like talking. I like telling stories. I like sitting down with people and having a conversation. And my books are very conversational. It means that they're sort of easy to listen to. They're easy to read. It's like having a conversation with me. So they were very easy to write. The tedious part is structuring the book and actually editing it so that there's no grammatical errors, spelling mistakes, sentence structure, all the things like that. That's the most tedious part of like the book writing process in my experience. And I think all the other writers that I've spoken with before, had a chance to share stages with, they all feel the same way. Writing it is easy. Actually sitting down and making the time to do that, that's the fun part. The hard part is actually getting it edited and getting it to the point where it's time to actually publish it.
Okay, we're going to take a break real quick and be back, and I'm going to go through the table of contents and probably towards the end ask you to read something that speaks to you or expresses a thought you want people to know about you. So we'll take a break real quick and then give you a chance to grab the book, and towards the end of the interview, we'll probably say, okay, can you read a passage or something that speaks to you? Fair enough?
Sure.
Okay, we'll be back in one moment with Steve Wolfe, the Young Entrepreneur's Guide to Life.
You're listening to the Core Business Show, sponsored by Apple Capital Group. Apple Capital Group in Jacksonville, Florida, is a commercial lender that specializes in asset-based loans, equipment leasing and financing, invoice financing, commercial real estate loans, and asset-based financing in the U.S. and Canada. Apple Capital Group is a direct lender that lends on their private equity investment portfolio. 90% of most loans are decided within 2 hours, and vendor funding within 24 hours after documents are completed, with a one-page application. No slow no's, just a quick decision and a fast yes. To get more information about lending from Apple Capital Group, call 866-611-7457. That's 866-611-7457 to speak with one of our loan specialists. Or visit us right now at applecapitalgroup.com. Welcome back to the Core. Once again, here's Tim Jacquet.
Well, we're back with Steve Wolfe again. We're talking about his book entitled Young Entrepreneur's Guide to Life. Steve, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me back, Tim.
Okay, so I'm looking at the table of contents of your book real quick, and you go through 9 chapters. Can you kind of highlight what those chapters are about? I think the first one talks about the people's business.
Right. I think the book is really an overview. I wrote this book. I got an idea for it. When I started, everything comes with a long story. I'll keep it as short as possible. I was in college, and I dropped out of college. I dropped out of college when I was 22 to pursue a career in financial services. And the year that I dropped out, I did extremely well. In fact, I had the two most lucrative years in my young 20s, the 2 years prior, or 2 years after dropping out of college. And when I went back into college, I went back for fun. I did not go back to college with the mentality or the idea that getting or obtaining a college degree was going to help me as far as making money. I went back to school for one reason, and that was to get smart and become more of a well-rounded individual. But I didn't fool myself in thinking that going back to college was actually going to teach me how to get rich, you know what I mean, or how to become a better young entrepreneur. So as I was finishing my last year of my undergraduate degree, I saw all of these kids. And I call them kids because we're not too far in age and everything. I had a couple of years on them, a little bit more life experience, but from where they were coming from, it felt like they were much younger than me, even though they were only a couple of years younger than me. And what I saw was that there was this whole generation, my generation, of young adults that had been sold on the idea that you grow up, you go to college, you get a degree, you get a good job at a corporation that has good benefits and something that you can make enough money to pay your school loans back and raise a family off of. And I think that as the time goes by, and I meet people who very much agree with this and also some people who very much disagree with this, but as the time goes by, I think that idea or that mentality, the way that things used to be done as far as, how college and academia is looked at is completely changed. And I think that academia, the current day, college institutions don't do a very good job in really preparing our generation to get out in the real world and actually survive. You know what I mean? As far as financially and teaching them how to build wealth. So the Young Entrepreneur's Guide to Life, I got the motivation to do it then by watching all of these kids graduate in debt, $60,000 to $80,000 or $120,000, having spent 4 years of their time and all that money, and then getting out into the workforce and not being able to find any employment. And I say when I get a chance to speak to younger younger generation, mostly college graduates or people that are in their junior and senior year, I tell them that basically by reading the book or by the time you get to the finish with the actual school, no matter what your degree is or what you're studying, you're going to be in two categories. And you're either going to be a job needer, someone who's going to need to seek employment, or a job creator, somebody that's going to be able to create jobs and create employments. And I said, what I talk about, really what I'm trying to explain there is that right now the world needs, especially in this country, we need job creators. You know what I mean? We need less employees and more entrepreneurs. So the Young Entrepreneur's Guide to Life was geared towards the young entrepreneurial person. And I was motivated by that because I believe that it's an epidemic, and without a change and a paradigm shift, that we're sort of headed off a cliff. But that doesn't mean that the 35-year-old reader can't get a whole lot out of this book, because if you've been in corporate America for a very long time or did college 10, 15 years ago, the Young Entrepreneur's Guide to Life is a great starting point for any entrepreneur.
Wow. Tell us about your opinion of college. I know you have some strong... In college, there's two ways of thinking. Those are the ones who's going to work for people. What you're pretty much trained to be is, or you're going to be the person who's going to be the employer. What advice did you give the person who's in college and say, hey, you need to be mindful that you're not going to always have a job. You need to have this entrepreneurial spirit. What did you tell them when you went back to college, and what they need to do to prepare for life in general?
So and I'm really careful here, because my idea or my intent is to never slam college, even though I do slam college a little bit. I'd say more or less I'm a critical thinker when it comes to college, or I'm a critical thinker when it comes to anything. And I think that you should hold any institution's feet to the fire in order to make it a better institution for the people. So what I would say very quickly about college to the person thinking about going there is that unless you know for a fact that you want to be a doctor, a rocket scientist, a physicist, or something that's going to absolutely require that you go get a 4-year degree and probably end up in medical school or law school and become a lawyer, then you might want to think about it, or take a second look at maybe not attending it. Because if all what you want to do is go into business for yourself and business is what interests you, I've learned so much more from mentors and people who were extremely successful than I ever did from a college professor about how to conduct some kind of a business. So that's the first thing. If you're a person that's in college and you've kind of already spent some time and money and it is your plan to finish it and that's what you're going to do, then I think that's admirable. That finishing college, and more importantly, finishing what you start, is incredibly important. So what I would tell that person is that, take everything that you say with a grain of salt. Just like your parents, when you got older, you realize that your parents didn't know anything, and your college professors are very much the same thing. You got to understand that not all, but most college professors they make about $50,000 to $60,000 a year, and they teach. That's what they do. So they may not have the experience in going out and starting their own business or traveling all over the world. They're experts in their field of study. And you need to remember that they're experts in their field of study. So when they're talking about their field of study, you should listen. You know what I mean? Humbly listen as a student. But if you want to learn about how to build wealth and how to create wealth, I would say seek and find people that have been extremely successful about doing it, and try to apprentice under them. Try to find out as much as you can about that person and how they got successful. More or less, that's all the people who contributed to the book. And I also have a section in there that deals with this conversation directly, called academic, or it's like School of Hard Knocks, basically, versus academic education versus street smarts. It's chapter 5 in the book. And so that's where I delve into that a little bit too. And then I also do a list of about 97 people of the most influential business people that have basically shaped American industrialism, the 19th, 20th, and 21st century, who are all college dropouts or did it with a high school education and sometimes even less. And that list of people includes, 7 U.S. presidents: Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Walt Disney, I think, Mark Twain. There's all kinds of very interesting people in there that have been incredibly successful that never spent a day in college or any academic institution besides a public education.
Wow. Also, you mentioned, I think a few moments ago, regarding finding a mentor. How can a person really find a mentor?
Well, I think it's really as simple as you find somebody who has what you want, where you respect that person in business, and you humbly approach that person and say, hey, I respect what you've done in business, and I want to learn. I want to learn how you did it. Will you teach me? Will you teach me? Will you give me pointers on doing it? My experience is that people who've been incredibly successful, that are very well established, when you approach them with that type of humility, with a real want and an insatiable desire to really understand the concepts of what, they've done, then they'll be more than happy to teach you. But you have to be willing, and you have to be willing to take the things that person says and apply them, so that person knows that you're serious. I think getting anywhere in life for any amount of success in every business that I've ever been involved in, that I've had any type of success in, there's been a mentor or a series of mentors. And I cover that in chapter 2, really talking about the importance of having a mentor.
Okay. Well, for example, there are some people, I know we have texts here. People, they say, if I really want this particular mentor, how can I get to this person? And maybe they reach in too high. I'm going to assume you can't go and approach Mark Cuban and say, hey, I want to be your mentor. But how can you find someone in an industry, your advice, that you can find someone in that particular industry that you can approach and ask them that you don't even know them?
Well, so what I would give them a vested interest to want to mentor you.
Okay.
So, for example, if you work in capital management, then you would probably be best off working in a firm or working for a firm that has somebody that you respect a whole lot. And then you would go to that person and say, hey, so-and-so, I really respect you done in business, kind of the same way that I said it. And the way that you prove to yourself that you're worthy of their mentorship is by the work that you're doing and by the tenacity in your field of study. So for me, I do network marketing. When I meet somebody who says, I want you to mentor me and I want you to teach me everything that you know, then I say, okay, here's the things that you need to do for our business. Go out here and start these things as best as you can and show me that you're actually willing to do some of the work. And if you at least try and I see you working hard and doing it, then I will invest time into you, and then I have a vested interest in them actually doing well. So it's not like it's taking time out of my day. I want to teach somebody for my business. I mean, if you're mentoring somebody that works in capital management with you and they're on your team or something like that, you have a vested monetary interest, then it only makes sense that you're going to help that person out. So give a mentor a reason to want to help you and show them by suiting up and showing up and trying hard and doing the best that you can and really making them believe that you're willing to do whatever it takes in order to become successful.
Absolutely. In chapter 8, he talks about the struggle and pitfalls of an entrepreneur. Tell us about the struggles and pitfalls.
So, I put that in the book too, because one thing that in talking to me, you'll understand, I pull no punches. And when I put a book out, it's so important for me to get honest in there as much as possible. And I would be lying to you. And I think any kind of book in personal development would lie to you if it didn't uncover some of the truth about that it is a struggle. And I think that the whole idea of becoming an entrepreneur is a risk. And some people just aren't cut out for it. You know what I mean? They absolutely aren't cut out for it. And they would be much better off working for some corporation for the next 40 years. And so when I talk about the struggles and pitfalls of an entrepreneur, I talk about how it's not for the weak at heart. And the people that I've gotten a chance to work with and really mentor, what you come to understand, and I guess how I bring it all around, is that by getting in there and just failing at some things, by getting in there and just trying, you know what I mean? You get in, you try, you attempt something, you fail at it, and you realize that it didn't kill you. And it's a struggle, and the struggles and the pitfalls that I put in there, at least, were some of the things that I went through to sort of give you a roadmap to maybe some of the landmines that you're going to encounter or some of the things to look out for as you start your own path and your own journey. But I definitely make it very clear that there is no clean way or no linear line of success. That in order to become extremely successful in whatever it is that you do, you're going to have to get dirty, you're going to fall down, and you're probably going to get hurt sometimes. And if it doesn't sound like, if the willing and the desire isn't greater than any pain that you're going to encounter along the way, then you should probably stick to your day job. That's the advice that I would give.
Okay. Before we go into closing, you can kind of give us a summary about why you wrote the book and read something from it, and if you have any closing statements.
Absolutely. So, again, I wrote the book because there's a need for it. There's an absolute need.
Okay.
And I was told a long time ago by a lot of different people to find a need and fill it. And that's exactly what I've done. So, read it. I explained to read it. If you're looking for the book, you can find it any place or any online place where books are sold. Amazon.com. It's called The Young Entrepreneur's Guide to Life. Steve Elloitt Wolfe is my name. I'm the author. You can find me at StephenEWolfe.com or visit me on Facebook, which is Facebook.com/Steve Wolfe. And there's also an audiobook and an ebook out there. So I'll read a little excerpt out of Chapter 7, which is developing your story and conveying a message. The human psyche is an incredible thing. A person's mentality or deterministic view on the world is the sum total of all the experiences that person has had. We tend to push down the bad experiences in our lives, associating them with pain and discomfort. Our positive association with things that make us feel good usually exists at times in our life where something went right or worked out. The duality with positive and negative associations tend to guide our actions and decision-making process in what and how we make our decisions. And even though our experience guides our decisions, that may not always be in the best interest for us. If you can internalize and comprehend what I just wrote here at first glance, then you are one big step ahead of the game. The concept took me years to understand because it was only through my experiences that I could understand how I would decide. Right about now, I bet you're wondering what this has to do with developing a story. I'll get to that, I promise. But first, let me wrap your head around the concept of reframing. So, lots of incredible stuff in there. Wisdom of the ages. A lot of the contributors are all very well-off multimillionaires in their fields of study, and it's not a book pertaining to any one business. It's generally entrepreneurship. So go read it, go buy it, check it out. It's incredible. Appreciate the support.
Perfect. And where can we find the book?
So you can find the book, like I said, StephenEWolfe.com is my website. Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble. It's in some select bookstores, but you'll probably end up getting it cheaper from my website or from Amazon.com. You can search Stephen Elloitt Wolfe or The Young Entrepreneur's Guide to Life. You can also find my first book, Rich Kid Syndrome, there as well. And contact me on Facebook. I like talking to people. I like hearing feedback about the book, finding out what people are doing out in the world and what their experiences and their stories are, and feedback from reading the book and applying some of the principles in their life.
Great. I really appreciate you coming onto the program again. And your website address again is
www.StephenEWolfe.com. That's STEVEN, the letter E, WOLF.com.
Great. Steve, I appreciate you coming on the program. Thank you much.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
Okay, have a great day. Appreciate it. Again, it's been another production of the Core Business Show. You can download this episode on iTunes on Blog Talk Radio. Everybody, have a great day. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Core Business Show with Tim Jacquet. For a free quote on equipment leasing and financing, visit our website, applecapitalgroup.com. That's applecapitalgroup.com. And fill out the information to receive your free quote. We hope you'll join us for our next episode. And remember, you can always get to the Core via iTunes. You'll find all our previous episodes there. Thanks again for listening to the Core Business Show with Tim Jacquet.